The moment you stop faking peace and start hearing your soul, there comes a quiet, almost imperceptible moment when something inside you shifts. You hear your own voice, not the one shaped to gain approval, but the raw, tired whisper asking, "What about me?" You've spent your life being agreeable, bending to fit others' comfort, confusing compliance with compassion. But beneath that stretched smile, beneath the nods and careful silence, there is an ache, not loud, but constant. It hums through your body like a forgotten truth trying to surface. Carl Jung called this ache the cost of wearing a persona, a mask made not from authenticity but from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being unneeded, fear of what might happen if you stop saying yes. So you shrink yourself to be digestible, soften your edges, swallow your opinions, hoping that being liked will one day feel like being loved. But it never does. People-pleasing is not kindness. It is slow erasure. Each time you betray your truth to keep the peace, you trade your wholeness for temporary safety. And though the world may reward your obedience with praise, it never returns the part of you that knows who you are without the performance. There is nothing noble about disappearing for the sake of harmony. Jung saw this not as humility, but as a distortion of self, a false identity built to survive, not to thrive. Survival comes with a cost. It costs your fire, your freedom, your ability to stand tall in a world that benefits from your silence. But if you're here reading this, maybe that fire hasn't gone out, maybe it's waiting, maybe your soul is done rehearsing, because the moment you stop needing to be liked is the moment you begin to be free, not reckless, not unkind, just real. And realness, unlike approval, can never be taken from you. This is where the journey begins, not by changing who you are, but by remembering who you were before the mask, before you confused peace with permission, before you became a stranger to your own needs. The next part of your life won't demand perfection. It requires honesty, and that honesty will cost you something, but what it gives you back is everything. Why saying no feels wrong at first, but sets you free what no one often tells you is this. The moment you start pulling away from the role of the pleaser, something inside you begins to shift. It's not rebellion. It's remembrance. A part of you that's been silent for years starts to speak in unfamiliar ways, not with anger, but with clarity. At first, saying no feels wrong. It feels like betrayal, refusing to offer yourself for emotional labor, stopping the smoothing of every edge to keep someone else comfortable. But that feeling of guilt, it's not the truth. It's just the echo of the persona breaking down. Carl Jung warned us, when we confuse our persona, the mask we wear, with our true self, we cut off our connection to the soul. The persona helps us survive, yes, but living inside it too long means forgetting who built it. And you did build it, piece by piece, out of the looks that shamed you, the silences that taught you not to speak, the praise that came only when you performed. Eventually, the mask became more familiar than your own face. You started editing every sentence to sound agreeable, measuring your worth by how easy you were to love. You might remember a tiny moment, almost forgotten, when you laughed at a joke that hurt you and no one noticed, not even you. But later you felt a quiet burn inside, like something sacred was left behind. That's how self-betrayal often begins, softly, in a crowded room. You shrink, smile, stay silent, while your soul twists in discomfort. It's not dramatic, it's practiced. And that's the tragedy. You became so fluent in their language, you forgot your own. You became the caretaker of everyone's comfort, except your own. You thought this was kindness. You thought this was love. But real love doesn't demand your disappearance. What Jung understood, and what you're beginning to feel, is that repression isn't neutrality. It's slow decay. Every swallowed truth, every ignored instinct, every time you said yes when your body whispered no, these choices build up. Not just in your mind, but deep in your nervous system, in your breath, in the way you flinch before. Asking for what you need, you start losing sleep, not from overwhelm, but because a part of you is grieving. Grieving the self that was silenced to keep the peace. Eventually something breaks, not destructively, but necessarily. A soft rupture that says, I can't live like this anymore. Not because you want to hurt others, but because you realize how much it's been hurting you. So you begin to turn inward, not to retreat, but to reclaim. You stop asking who they want you to be. You start asking who you are when no one is watching. At first, this shift feels like loss. You might lose relationships built on your compliance. You might lose roles that required your self-erasure, but what you gain is far more honest. You gain yourself. The real you, the one waiting behind every polite nod and forced smile, begins to return, and this you doesn't speak with apology. It speaks with groundedness, quiet power, and truth that no longer asks for permission. This is the start of individuation, the slow, sacred process of peeling back layers of performance to find the soul beneath. It's the process of becoming someone you recognize again, not perfect but real, not agreeable but whole. You're not betraying anyone by becoming yourself. You're simply ending the betrayal of your own essence, and as frightening as it feels, this is the beginning of freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't need applause, the kind that lets you sit quietly in a room and still feel complete. Because now you are no longer performing, you are present, and presence is what heals. What truly heals. You thought you were being kind, but you were abandoning yourself. The most painful realization on this journey isn't that others misunderstood you, it's that you misunderstood yourself. For years, the version of you you've been defending wasn't truly you. It was a patchwork made from expectations, shaped by silence, and held together by the need for approval. You believed you were being loyal to family, to friends, to peace. But what you were really doing was abandoning the small, sacred voice inside you that kept asking, but what about me? Carl Jung called this betrayal the splitting of the psyche, the moment when your authentic self is pushed underground so that the socially acceptable self can survive. It doesn't happen suddenly. It's a gradual process, 1,000 small self-abandonments that slowly build your personality. You learn to smile when you're exhausted. You tolerate what breaks your spirit. You call it strength. But deep inside, a part of you remembers who you were before you became agreeable. Think back to the child you once were. The one who asked questions that made adults uncomfortable, who cried loudly or laughed at the wrong moments, who wanted things without shame. That child wasn't broken. That child was alive, but over time you were taught to edit yourself, not through cruelty but through countless subtle signals, the disapproving glance, the withheld affection, praise only given when you performed. So you began to comply, you became easy, you became good. But in this context, goodness meant suppression. It meant silencing your instincts to keep others comfortable. It meant dimming your light so you wouldn't outshine their sense of safety. And that's where the pattern began. Not in adulthood, but in those earliest moments when love was confused with approval and safety was earned through compliance. Now, as an adult, you feel the weight of all those unspoken words, the ache of buried needs, the quiet grief of a life lived at half volume. You sit at dinner tables and nod while your insides twist. You say yes to favors that drain you. You apologize for being tired, for being unavailable, for simply being human. When you try to speak your truth, your voice trembles, not from weakness, but from disuse. This isn't just a communication issue, it's a soul wound, one that formed when you decided long ago that your truth was too dangerous to share, that your needs were negotiable, that love had to be earned by becoming small. But here's the turning point. What once was survival is now sabotage. What once protected you now keeps you from becoming whole. You're not a child anymore. You don't need to beg for belonging. You don't need to shrink to stay safe. You don't need to keep proving you're good enough because you already are. Beneath the layers of people-pleasing, beneath the mask of agreeableness, there is a self that is not only real, but radiant. A self that isn't afraid to be disliked, because being disliked for your truth is less painful than being loved for your mask. A self that knows peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict, but from refusing to abandon your soul just to be liked. This is the beginning of your return, not to who the world wanted you to be, but to who you were before the world told you to hide. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. People might push back. They may call you distant, difficult, or different. But that's not a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you're finally being honest. And honesty, as Jung understood, isn't the opposite of kindness. It's the foundation of true connection. Because no one can truly love you if they've never really met you. And now, finally, you are ready to be met, not in pieces, not in parts, but in your full, true self. When you finally speak your truth, the deeper unraveling begins, not in the moment you say your first no, but in the silence that follows. The world you built around your mask doesn't collapse quietly. It resists, it pushes back. Sometimes, so do you. You find yourself caught between the clarity of your truth and the comfort of your old role. You speak your feelings, and someone pulls away. You set a boundary, and someone calls you difficult. Suddenly, you're not just mourning lost relationships. You're grieving the part of yourself that needed those connections to stay. This is the emotional crucible Jung warned about, the psychic death of who you thought you were. Not because you were fake, but because your identity was built on survival, not wholeness. Now that you're choosing truth over tolerance, your nervous system panics. You feel guilty, not because you've done something wrong, but because you're doing something unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe, especially to a traumatized mind. Imagine a woman who has always been the emotional anchor for everyone else. She listens, smooths conflicts, and shows up even when she's exhausted. People love her for it. They rely on her calm, her steadiness, her endless availability. But they don't see the cost she pays in silence, the shaking hands after. She puts the phone down, the aching body from holding back tears no one ever asks about. Then one day, she says no, just once. She cancels dinner because she needs rest. She doesn't over-explain or apologize. The response is subtle withdrawal, a coldness in a voice, a look of confusion or disappointment. Not loud, but enough to remind her. Her worth was tied to her. Compliance? In that moment, something inside her breaks. But it's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. She realizes, if love requires my exhaustion, it's not love. If acceptance demands my disappearance, it's not acceptance. And if I have to betray myself to belong, then I'm not really belonging, I'm bargaining. This is the moment Jung described as the turning of the soul, the sacred rebellion. Not against others, but against the voices inside that told you to stay small. People-pleasing isn't just about others. It's about the contract you made long ago. If I am good, I will be loved. If I am easy, I will be safe. If I disappear, I will be accepted. But now, with every no that honors your energy, every truth that shakes the room, every boundary that reclaims your space, you begin to rewrite that contract. Slowly, the guilt softens. It no longer screams betrayal, it whispers freedom. You start to see that your truth is not a threat, it's a filter. It doesn't push people away, it reveals who is capable of staying. Yes, some will leave, but those who remain will be different. They won't be drawn to your silence, but to your sincerity. They won't need your mask to love you. They won't praise your selflessness while feeding off your exhaustion. They will sit beside your honesty, even when it's messy. They won't flinch when your truth breaks the old patterns, because they are learning how to come home to themselves, too. In that shared courage, a new connection is born, not based on performance, but on presence, not on pleasing, but on mutual respect, not on keeping the peace, but on growing through the discomfort of realness. Jung called this the return of the self, the re-emergence of the soul after years of exile. It's not perfect. It's not neat or tidy. It's raw, confusing, often lonely before it becomes liberating. But in this space, you begin to understand something sacred. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of truth. And when your truth is finally allowed to speak, you no longer settle for relationships built on your silence. You begin to live, not as someone trying to be enough, but as someone who already is. The grief. No one talks about. Saying goodbye to who? You had to be, let's be honest. Most people never say this out loud. Transformation rarely feels empowering at first. It often feels like grief, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're saying goodbye to who you had to be to survive. That version of you, the pleasing, polished, predictable self, was never fake. It was brilliant. It was the child who learned to read the room before speaking, the teenager who knew how to shrink away from conflict, the adult who found worth in being wanted, useful, and irreplaceable. But now you see it. You feel it. That life came at a cost. You spent years being everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. You thought this made you generous. But Jung would say it made you fragmented. Because when you trade your truth for attachment, your soul starts to split. You don't feel whole. You feel haunted by exhaustion you can't explain, guilt you can't shake, and relationships that feel more like roles than real connection. There was a woman who believed being needed was the same as being loved. She never said no to her mother's demands, never disappointed her partner's expectations, never let her friends feel neglected. She was admired for her kindness, praised for her availability. But inside, she was fading. She hadn't laughed without overthinking in years. Her dreams sat quietly in journals. Her anger, when it surfaced, came out sideways, sharp with resentment. Then came a moment, not dramatic, just real. She said no, a small no, to a favor she didn't have the energy for. What followed wasn't violence or rejection. It was silence, a long, uncomfortable pause, the kind that makes you question everything. In that pause, she felt it, the old panic, the ancient fear that she had broken something sacred by protecting herself. But she didn't apologize. She didn't backtrack. She let the silence stand. For the first time in her life, she chose truth over approval. It didn't feel like power. It felt like loss. But it was the kind of loss that breeds freedom. This is the subtle, soul-deep work of individuation. Jung never promised it would be easy. He said it would make you whole, because individuation is not about fixing yourself. It's about meeting the parts of you that were never allowed to exist, the anger you buried to stay soft, the ambition you suppressed to be likable, the fear you disguised as selflessness. All of it comes to the surface when you stop pleasing, and it's terrifying, because the first lie your guilt tells you is that you're becoming selfish. But you're not. You're becoming sovereign. The difference? Selfishness is extraction. Sovereignty is self-respect. When you begin to live from self-respect, your energy changes. You no longer over-explain your boundaries. You don't feel compelled to be palatable. You start to value the peace in your body more than the praise in your ears. Slowly, people around you start to notice. Some will distance themselves, not out of cruelty, but because your new energy no longer matches their expectations. Let them go. Their leaving isn't rejection. It's a clearing, a spiritual reorganization, and in that space something miraculous begins. New people arrive, people who don't need you to shrink so they can shine, people who don't confuse your silence with agreement, people who feel like truth, not transaction. But this new reality won't come from force. It comes from frequency, from how you carry yourself when your worth isn't tied to your usefulness. You walk differently when you're not performing. You speak differently when you're not afraid of being misunderstood. You breathe differently. When your nervous system no longer flinches at the thought of someone else's disappointment. That difference, that quiet, rooted, luminous selfhood, is what Jung meant by integration. You are no longer many fragmented selves dancing to external demands. You are one undivided presence, and that presence changes everything. It doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. It doesn't mean you become hard. It means your softness is no longer a strategy. It's a gift given by choice, not compulsion. It means you no longer walk into rooms scanning for safety. You carry it with you. This inner steadiness, this refusal to betray yourself for connection, is not rebellion. It's rebirth. It can't be taught through surface affirmations or performative boundaries. It must be lived. Day by day, choice by choice, breath by breath, until one day you wake up and realize something has changed. You're not pretending anymore. You're not pleasing anymore. You're not anxiously checking for signs you're enough. You simply are, not perfect, but present, not always understood, but always true. And in that moment you understand what Jung tried to tell us all along. The person you were before the world told you who to be, that was never the illusion. That was your soul. And now, finally, it's free. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming whole. After this, you'll stop pleasing people, not because you've hardened, but because you've returned to yourself. Not because you've lost kindness, but because you've remembered your worth. Carl Jung never asked you to reject others. He asked you to reclaim the parts of yourself you exiled just to be accepted. He wanted you to stop confusing sacrifice with strength, silence with maturity, and exhaustion with love. He understood the pain of transformation, the kind that doesn't shout, but quietly aches beneath a practiced smile. And yet, he knew this pain was sacred, because when you begin to choose authenticity over approval, something ancient stirs within you. The original self, untouched by praise or punishment, begins to breathe again. This journey isn't about becoming someone new, it's about remembering who you were before you were told who to be. Remembering isn't a single moment. It's a slow unfolding, like light returning to a room that forgot it had windows. It takes courage to sit with your discomfort without abandoning yourself, to stand in your truth without dressing it up, to make it easier for others to accept. This is a quiet revolution, no longer needing to be agreeable to be loved, useful to be valued, or perfect to be whole. The path you've walked, the awakening, the unraveling, the rising, is not an end. It's the beginning of a new way of being, one that doesn't seek validation through performance, but finds peace in presence, one that doesn't mistake guilt for guidance or rejection for failure, but sees them as signs you're finally living. By the compass of your soul, you may not be celebrated on this path. You may lose people along the way, but what you gain is irreplaceable, the ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Not a role, not a mask, but someone real, someone free. Let this be your knowing. You are not here to earn your place. You are here to embody it. You are not here to be everything to everyone. You are here to be fully yourself, even if it makes others uneasy. True healing is not found in being liked. It is found in being liberated. And those who are truly liberated are not those who are never misunderstood. They are those who are no longer afraid to be. Walk forward. Not with armor, but with awareness. Speak with the voice that trembled for years behind politeness. Sit with the feelings that once made you twist yourself into shapes that were never yours. Let those who cannot meet the real you fall away like autumn leaves, gently, without blame. And let what remains be true. What remains will be yours, because what is meant for your soul will never ask you to betray it. This is the quiet power of someone who no longer pleases to survive, This is the quiet peace of someone who has chosen to live. If something in this message stirred you, if even one word reflected your inner experience, I invite you to share your voice in the comments. Have you met that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the sign they didn't know they were searching. If someone close to you silently struggles with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach those who need to remember. Real love does not demand we shrink. True connection does not ask for the sacrifice of the soul, and the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, we journey beneath the surface, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, question, or wound you want us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. Until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home, and from that wholeness all things real are born.